In the second part of this lecture, we'll look at the physiology of diving. We will look at how pressure changes as the depth of water increases. We'll examine on the effects of depth on the partial pressure of nitrogen and oxygen and how they can become toxic at higher levels. And this is the only time in physiology we're looking at nitrogen. Other than this, it's not really important. And in regards to scuba diving, we will talk about the decompression sickness. So the normal atmospheric pressure is at 101 kilopascal, and that is equivalent to 760 millimeter mercury. But when you dive, pressure around you increases. That's because you will get pressure not only from the atmosphere, but also from the water above your body. So with every increase in 10 meter, you will get an equivalent increase in 1 atmospheric pressure. So now the pressure has doubled. It's tripled at 20 meter and quadrupled at 30 meters. Because of the compression exerted by this increased pressure, you can see how your lungs volume has shrunken accordingly. So you learn this in physics. It is your P1 V1 equals P2 V2. As the overall pressure increases, so do the partial pressures for component gases. That includes PO2 and PN2 and all other gases as well. In summary, PO2 and PN2 increase substantially with depth. But so what? Well, you get a higher concentration of oxygen and nitrogen, and they can be toxic. In fact, high level of oxygen can cause blindness with the premature babies. And a higher oxygen level also generate more ROS, the reactive oxygen species, which are free radicals that can damage your cells. So on surface, you get a nitrogen partial pressure of 0.8 bar and 0.2 bar for oxygen. But if you dive at 30 meters depth, that pressure quadruple into 3.2 bar for nitrogen and 0.8 bar for oxygen. According to Henry's law, more gases can be dissolved under a higher partial pressure, and therefore more gases can be dissolved at a greater depth. So at the normal barometric measure, you begin with an equal distribution of dissolved gases between your lungs and tissues, but at a greater depth, your lungs will be compressed due to the higher pressure, and that also compresses the air within your lungs, causing the increase in the partial pressure for all gases. As a result, there is a bigger gap P1 minus P2 according to the Fick's law, which drives diffusion of dissolved gases from your lungs into your tissues. Now, for example, the amount of dissolved nitrogen in your tissue can be as high as 10 liter when you are diving at 300 feet, while it's only 2 liter at 33 feet. So you can see such a big difference. So having too much dissolved nitrogen can lead to narcosis or drowsiness. Nitrogen narcosis is also known as the raptures of the deep or the Martini effect in the slang of scuba diving. And it is known as the Martini effect for a good reason, because it feels exactly like taking alcohol. At the depth of 120 feet, due to increased nitrogen in your tissues and brain, you start to feel happy and carefree. But if you dive further, you'll become drowsy. Going further, you're going to get physical weakness and clumsiness. This is when you are exposed to a great risk of accidents. And if you dive beyond 250 feet, you'll be severely incapacitated or go into coma. So don't they sound something like alcohol intoxication? So if you cannot take alcohol due to health or religious reason, diving can give you some similar sensation. And the mechanism is something similar to that of anesthetics. So what causes narcosis? It is suggested that dissolved nitrogen in your nerve membrane can disrupt ion conductance, and subsequently it disrupts to your transmission. So what will be the resolution? Well, you can use a gas fixture with a lower PN2 level with some mix of different gas, such as the use of specific gas heliox in diving. So heliox is a mix of oxygen and helium, and it has a lower narcotic effect than nitrogen, but they are very expensive. And now we'll look at oxygen toxicity under the hyperbaric conditions. So when you get a lower oxygen partial pressure, that is called hypoxia, and you have learned how our body adjusts to this condition. But when the oxygen partial pressure is too high, like higher than 1.5 or 1.6 bar, you are going to get hyperoxia. So don't you think that more oxygen is better? Because your nervous system is very sensitive towards a high oxygen level. That could lead to muscle spasm, nausea and vomiting, and it can cause tunnel vision, loss of hearing. It's not good for your pulmonary system either, which is leading to breathing difficulty and so on. So in the hospital, they will not give you pure oxygen. It is something in between 24 to 40% to avoid the symptoms of hyperoxia. Before we proceed to the last section, try to answer this question. In scuba diving, does it take a longer time to dive or to ascend? And why do you think so? Well, the answer is B, to ascend. Why? So, if you have dived for a long period, for more than 20 meters, you need to ascend slowly. You might even need to stop halfway to allow all the dissolved gases in your tissues to diffuse back into the lungs for exhalation. So this step is known as decompression. If you do not do this, or if you ascend too quickly, you're going to get the decompression syndrome. So what happens here is that all these dissolved gases, especially nitrogen, will come out very quickly from your tissues into your blood, and that can lead to embolism, which are bubbles that can damage your neuron, your muscle and joints, and they can be very painful in the mild cases. But in severe cases, this can lead to paralysis or even death. So a common practice in scuba diving is to take a stop at every 15 feet for more than 3 minutes so that you have enough time for decompression to happen. So what can you do if you get the decompression sickness? Well, you have to go through a recompression followed by a slow decompression. So the whole idea of this recompression is to force these air bubbles back into your tissues by using a high pressure, or better known as a hyperbaric chamber. Then it will be followed by a slow decompression to allow the diffusion of those dissolved gases from your tissues back into lungs for exhalation. And let me show you another video which I believe you will enjoy this.
Sometimes, when a fish is reeled up to the surface, it will appear inflated, with its eyes bulging out of their sockets and its stomach projecting out of its mouth, as if it's been blown up like a balloon. This type of bodily damage, caused by rapid changes in pressure, is called barotrauma. Under the sea, pressure increases by 14.7 pounds per square inch for every 33-foot increase in depth. So take the yellow eye rockfish, which can live as deep as 1,800 feet, where there's over 800 pounds of pressure on every square inch. That's equivalent to the weight of a polar bear balancing on a quarter. Now, Boyle's gas law states that the volume of a gas is inversely related to pressure. So, any air-filled spaces like a rockfish's swim bladder or human lungs will compress as they descend deeper and expand as they ascend. After a fish bites a fisherman's hook and is quickly reeled up to the surface, the air in its swim bladder begins to expand. Its rapid expansion actually forces the fish's stomach out of its mouth, while the increased internal pressure pushes its eyes out of their sockets, a condition called exophthalmia. Sometimes, rockfish eyes will even have a crystallized appearance from corneal emphysemas, little gas bubbles that build up inside the cornea. Thankfully, a scuba diver doesn't have a closed swim bladder to worry about. A diver can regulate pressure in her lungs by breathing out as she ascends, but must be wary of other laws of physics that are at play under the sea. Henry's law states that the amount of a gas that dissolves in a liquid is proportional to its partial pressure. The air a diver breathes is 78% nitrogen. At a higher pressure under the sea, the nitrogen from the air in a scuba tank diffuses into a diver's tissues in greater concentrations than it would on land. If the diver ascends too quickly, this built-up nitrogen can come out of solution and form microbubbles in her tissues, blood, and joints, causing decompression sickness, aka the bends. This is similar to the fizz of carbon dioxide coming out of your soda. Gas comes out of solution when the pressure is released, but for a diver, the bubbles cause severe pain and sometimes even death. Divers avoid falling victim to the bends by rising slowly and taking breaks along the way, called decompression stops, so the gas has time to diffuse back out of their tissues and to be released through their breath. Just as a diver needs decompression, for a fish to recover, it needs recompression, which can be accomplished by putting it back in the sea. But that doesn't mean fish should just be tossed overboard. An inflated body will float and get scooped up by a hungry sea lion or pecked at by seagulls. There's a common myth that piercing its stomach with a needle will let air escape, allowing the fish to swim back down on its own. But that is one balloon that shouldn't be popped. To return a fish properly to its habitat, fishermen can use a descending device instead, to lower it on a fishing line and release it at the right depth. As it heads home and recompression reduces gas volume, its eyes can return to their sockets and heal, and its stomach can move back into place. This fish will live to see another day, once more free to swim, eat, reproduce, and replenish the population.
With that, we have come to the end of this lecture. So in the first part, you have learned that an increase in altitude reduces the PO2 level, and that causes a challenge in distributing the oxygen around the body. And our body acclimatized by increasing ventilation, increasing renal bicarbonate excretion, increasing 2,3-DPG production, and increasing angiogenesis. While in the second part, you have learned that an increase in depth causes the increase of the partial pressure of all gases, such as oxygen and nitrogen, and that promotes more diffusion of dissolved gases into our tissues. As a consequence, ascending too fast can cause the decompression syndrome.